Hello, and we're back. We wanted to kind of wrap up the series, and this we hope will be a book and maybe even a movie. I think it'd be better in a movie format just as much as an audio format, and about Here to Hell and Back and what George meant by the title of this. And he got a chance to listen to the interview, and we were trying to take away some things from this story that George wanted to point out. And I wanted George to share a little bit more about the moral of the story and what he gained as a person. Um, George was 2 years old, and his mother wanted to give him up for adoption. George did not grow up with his dad. His dad was incarcerated unfairly and falsely imprisoned. And if you hear stories like that today, you know that Georgia's story is not that unfamiliar to people that have had this happen to themselves here as well. And we were talking about this earlier. So, George, whenever I'm going to ask you some questions about some things, and take a minute or two to answer. Um, the moral of the story really is about what your dad went through, or is it way the way you were treated without a dad? I mean, your dad was there to protect you, and I think that's one of the things that happened in this that we didn't really get a chance to talk about.
All right, is it my turn?
Oh yeah, it's your turn. Yeah, George, welcome back to your interview. Welcome back to
Thanks,
your
guys.
interview.
Hi,
Like,
Jennifer.
what I wanted you to talk about is like what it was like to not grow up with a dad and all that, all the comments that people made. Your mother made comments. Everybody made fun of you, and you lived in the shadows of your dad's horrific mistreatment.
Yeah. Okay, now I'll tell you the moral of the story in a few words is never, but never give up. And I live by that. You know, as long as you never give up, you can't lose the game. I played football and I believe that. I don't care what the score is, you never, ever give up. And I think that's been the theme of my life. I was determined. I don't care what hand I was dealt, how bad it was, how many times I was knocked down, the orphanage, my children, being estranged and kidnapped and so forth. To this day, I do not give up. I still hold hope that my first two daughters, after almost 50 years, that I will see them. I will see my grandkids. My youngest daughter at 22, I still hold out hope to see her. I never, ever give up because once you give up, the game is over. And for me, I always want to be in the game. I've always wanted to be where the action is, whether it was on a football field, in engineering, or like doing this. Most people would have this story in their life, would run from it, hide from it, bury it, never bring it up.
Yeah,
For God's sake, you don't mention that your father was in a institution of criminally insane because that typecast you as the apple that doesn't fall far from the tree. So most people would run from that and hide it and bury it, and never bring it up.
yeah, and
What do
you
I
know
do?
what? Those
I
institutions, no matter
I do
how
that.
you said something very important about the institutions, no matter how they try to repackage it, it's still an institution, and it's still very terrible experience for any person to be forced into a place where you need to be with your family and you need to be a dad, and your dad needed to be there for you. And what broke my heart is the story about Holy Family Institute. Now, what year was that you were at Holy Family Institute? That's over
Oh
there in
God,
Emsworth.
you're asking me to go back 60 some 70 years.
Oh
Remember
wow.
exactly what? Yeah, I mean, I was young. I was maybe four, something like that, when I went in there. About that age, I was a young guy. I mean, 3, 4, 5, maybe something like that. It wasn't very old.
You were only a toddler.
A toddler, yeah.
So
Because
you basically were you could have been given up for adoption by
oh,
by
I
an
just
attorney.
oh, I could have been. Yeah, my mother wanted to give me away. She took me to his house, and ready to sign the paper, but she said, "Oh, my family would never forgive me." Otherwise, I'd been
Wow.
raised in the home of a prominent attorney. Would have been the best thing she could have done for me
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
to give me away. But I was crying my eyes out. I was 2 years old. Mommy, why are you doing this? I'm your little boy. What did I do?
Oh,
And she was ready to just throw me away like I was garbage.
she basically treated you like you were really nothing,
Yeah,
and
I
your
got
mother
wanted.
basically
I remember. I
she could have
remember
signed
going
you over.
along when we were walking to his house. She said she was acting a little angry for me. I said, "What's wrong, Mom?" And she said, "Well, you're a pain in the neck. You cost me money. I don't love you. I'm getting rid of you." She was like that. And I
She
said,
said that,
"Mommy, I'm your little boy.
and she
Why are you
did.
doing this?"
She
And so
didn't just say
I'm
it. She didn't just say it either, George. She actually did this,
Oh
and
yeah, she was like angry. Her face and everything. I didn't know what I did to make her so mad. She had this look on her face like
you're a
I hate
baby.
you, and like I want to get, can't wait to get dump you and get rid of you. And I don't know whether she was trying to psych herself up for what she was about to do, but and then we went into this guy's big house. And he had the paperwork on the table, and he handed her the pen. The pen, she held the pen over the paper, like within a couple inches, ready to sign. And he kept saying, and I'm crying and yelling and screaming. And he just said, Eleanor, just sign. They're just sign. Let's get this over with. And she just, every time she put the pen toward the paper, she backed away a little bit. And then she said, "Oh, I can't do this because my family would never forgive me." But she was angry, like,
She was
"Damn it."
worried about her family not forgiving her.
Yeah.
I think the
Yeah, that
most
was the main.
selfless.
That was the main thing that was on her mind was that the family would not my welfare, nothing about me. It was they would probably disown me if they found out I did this. Gave my own child away, my only child away. Like he was garbage.
I want to say this. I'm going to take a few minutes to explain because we're going to change the direction of where we're going with the interview because we're going to get to some other things. I want to say the issue on pro life is how selfless a decision it is to sign your child over to somebody else. It is a very selfless decision. And if you knew anything about his mother, she was very selfish. She did not care about what his little life was about. And it just goes to show you that the history of feminism and the history of abortion and why it's so important to be pro life because of decisions. When you sign the paper to put your child up for adoption, you're making a selfless decision. And in the long run, you're going to be a better person. You're going to have a better life altogether. And and that's kind of what happened to George. And this happened almost 60, almost 70 years ago. And
Over 70 years ago.
over
Over
70 years ago, and George
about
could have been,
about 75 years ago.
yeah, George could have been adopted by an attorney, a very
Yeah.
prominent attorney who wanted to raise him as his own son. And it it's an emotional experience because I went through the foster care system too, George, and I was put up for adoption as well. And I went through the exact same thing that George is. In fact, if you want to know a little bit about George and me, George is my cousin, and George and I both grew up in foster care type scenarios, and I know that feeling, and it breaks my heart because I know how many kids are unwanted, and it's not an easy story to tell when you realize the how many systematic abuse that went on all these years with between what George was going through and what I went through and what George's dad went through and so many people we probably don't even know about. But systematic abuse is it's the institutions. um there was probably, like what George said, there's probably been a lot of good things that was supposed to happen but didn't happen. And we're changing the direction of the conversation about what do you think, what kind of reform changes do you think can happen from as a result of our stories?
Well, I will tell you this: if I am an inspiration to anybody out there that's having a tough time, I taught in the public school system, I often told the story of a guy named Korchak Zierakowski. I'm sure almost nobody knows about Korchak, but he's my hero. I taught many a high school class, and you look out the window at a big mountain here in Arizona. And to my seniors, I would say, now you're all graduating. You're going to go in the Army. You're going to go to college. You're going to go be a mechanic. What if you had a kid in the class that said, see that mountain up there? When I graduate, I'm going to take a hammer and a chisel, and I'm going to carve that entire mountain in Pancho Villa on horseback. You would think that kid was totally nuts. Well, that kid was Korchak Zierakowski, an abandoned, kicked around orphan, Polish orphan, who was a nobody and a nothing in Boston. And long story short, he went out in 1948, met with the Indians. They gave him a mountain, Thunderhead Mountain, I think, to carve into a statue of Crazy Horse, the great Sioux warrior on a horse. And it's out there today in South Dakota. He married a girl 20 years younger than him. They had 10 or 11 kids. He built his own farm, his own lumber company, his own guest facility, and did everything for a long time by himself. The Indians looked at him askance until they saw this guy was the real deal. Now, where do you find human beings with that kind of grit? Well, I'll tell you where you find them. You find them when they never give up. Because his story, and if anybody wants to look it up, Korchak Zierakowski, Crazy Horse Mountain, you will see parallels with my story. He was my hero. And I modeled my life after my hero. Since I didn't have a father, I had to find heroes to substitute. And Korchak was right at the top of the list. And I say to my students, you tell me your school is not good enough, it doesn't have great facilities, I'll tell you something. If Korchak Zierakowski thinks that he can build the greatest man-made object on the face of the earth, bigger than the pyramids, by himself, then you can graduate this high school. My God. And, I inspired many, many students with the story of Korchak Zierakowski and Crazy Horse Monument. So when you're left without a father, you search for heroes. You get other role models in your life. And you say, every time things get tough, hey, if they can do it and suffer like they did, sure as hell I can do it. And I just saddled up and strapped on my boots. And no matter what was thrown at me, that's exactly what I've done, and I'm still doing it to this day with this radio interview. I mean, like I say, nobody in their right mind would do what I'm doing. They would run from such a story. About my father being an institution of the criminal. Nobody in their average person would never.
You're way different from the rest of the people out there. You carved your own way in a lot of ways. And what you said to a very important word is you said you were seeking a hero
Right.
because you literally had to look beyond your situation because really
Exactly.
what you went through is that you didn't see you didn't see it in those people like your mother. You didn't see it in the other people. You saw what your dad
No,
had.
they took away my father, so I couldn't use him. Most people use most boys, their father is their hero, and they love their dad, their mom. Well, I didn't have it. That was all taken away from me. So I had to kind of find my own hero.
Well, in a
You see what I
lot
mean?
of ways, your ability, you know how they always say in a lot of ways, you were handicapped at a young age because not in a physical handicap, but it was a handicap in a way. But some of your best qualities is that you got to teach students and they excelled. They probably learned more from you than I learned so much about life and everything by talking to you. And I've been pretty emotional doing this interview because you're my cousin. And at the same time, I know your story is compelling and important. And I don't know how we can get to that representative or that person that is going to be in the primary June 2nd. I don't know if that's going to happen. I do know, though, that there are people throughout Pennsylvania that have probably experienced what you went through or possibly went through something similar
and
themselves.
they're probably hiding it, not talking about it because they're ashamed. They figure, well, he must have done something horrible, so we won't talk about it. Everybody wants to talk on Facebook, for example, like their life is ideal and everybody in their family is beautiful, wonderful. Well, it's not always true. Sometimes, you can't control who your relatives are or your father and mother and what they do or what was done to them. You can't control that.
Oh
Only
no.
thing, and either you can run from it and hide from it and never admit it, and you can go on Facebook and pretend you have this perfect life when you know darn well down deep you don't have a perfect life, and you got a lot of dysfunctional people around you and your family and otherwise, but you never want to talk about them.
Right.
You know.
There's a lot
So
of people
that was,
that have put up a good front for a lot of people, and
oh
that
yeah,
doesn't really. You're not. You To me, I went through it too. It's disingenuous because it really doesn't tell the whole story,
no,
and
it
we
does.
all want to tell a story that's compelling. And what you did
Oh
is
yeah,
you told a
everybody wants to tell a beautiful story like they got the perfect Ozzie and Harriet family and everybody, mom and dad, and everybody loves them. Yeah, baloney. There's sad stories everywhere, but never come out. And this is one of the saddest. What happened to my dad is outrageous. Auschwitz only lasted for about 4 years in World War II. He was in there for almost 40 years in Auschwitz. Think about that.
yeah.
35 years of slave labor and torture. I mean, nothing in World War II even compares to that. And the fact that he survived that at all, even brain dead, is a bloody miracle.
What makes me
I mean,
grateful.
there are many men that gave up. They just sat in the corner and stared at the wall and slowly went insane. They got their pathetic little meal and they went to their slave labor job. They never made a fuss and they just died there. They spent their entire lives living in a daze looking at four bare walls and nothing else and waiting to die. I'll bet my dad
Wow.
was a fighter, and I think he got beat up a lot because if he's anything like me, he was a fighter. He was probably protesting and carrying on, and they probably got tired of beating him up, and then they injected him, I'm sure, with these chemicals and destroyed his brain.
Well, tell us.
But
How about tell us about what the future holds now? Like that you wrote. Do you feel empowered that you wrote that letter to the or
well,
that
yeah,
that
I want this to come out because I have got four children and many grandchildren that I've never seen. I haven't seen my first two daughters in almost 50 years. That's 50.
do you think
That's
that
got to
that
change.
do you think by writing the justice
Well,
system will be able to make this right again so that your
well,
grandchildren.
it may because part of the problem with them probably is they've been taught to be ashamed of me, maybe because of the story of my dad, and they feel like that their life belongs on the other side, their mother's side in New England, and that there's nothing worthy of anything on my side because of what they've been told about
Well,
my family history. So
y-
I'm sure when this is all ironed out and brought out in the open, it may give them another point of view that instead of being somebody terrible, their grandfather was a hero. He survived 35 years of living in Auschwitz.
and that's the
There aren't
moral.
many,
And that's
there
the
are
moral
not
of
many
this.
people that could do that.
And that's the moral of the story because we're at the end of the interview. And
Yeah.
George, I think by the next chapter of this saga is going to be written by you, and how you level this, it will be very important we follow up with it. We may follow up with it maybe within the next couple days or next weeks, but I want to wait and see what happens with the letters that we sent to the Department of Justice about what happened. So
I think that's a great idea, Jennifer. Great idea.
yeah, that's the
And
best way to end it.
I look forward to working with you. You're brilliant. You know that?
Yeah, I think that's the best way because we could talk about this all day long, and what I think is that those reforms that happen will be something that happens at the Department of Justice level and at the
Right.
representatives level in the Senate in Pennsylvania, so that something like this doesn't ever happen again, and that
Right.
you will have a way you will be on that House floor speaking in behalf of your dad and family.
Amen. That's the day I look forward to.
Now
And a
that
family reunion with all my children and all my grandchildren and all people like you. We're going to have one really tremendous family reunion one day. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that would be the moral of the story is to see you on the House floor in Pennsylvania delivering a speech that is compel that will compel legislators not only at the state level but in Washington D.C. Thank you, George.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.